Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the economy in Turkey. If you've been following the channel, you'll know that we've been covering Turkey for the last few years, and in October 2022, inflation hit a high of 85%, which was one of the highest rates in the world at that time. Now, at the back end of 2022 and the first half of 2023, inflation did start coming back down. It didn't get down to the levels that we've got in the West, but it was certainly moving in the right direction. However, in the second half of 2023, Turkey decided to change its economic policy and started to increase interest rates. And as a result of that, we've seen inflation taking off again. And the most recent data shows that inflation is now up to almost 70%, which is the third highest rate in the whole of the world. Now, in order to try to combat those high levels of inflation, the Turkish Central Bank has increased interest rates to 50%, which is actually the second highest rate out of any country in the world. So what's going on in the Turkish economy, and how are Turkey going to turn this around? Well, in today's video, we'll take a detailed look at what's going on with interest rates and inflation, and we'll have a look at what's happening with food inflation, because we always like to look at that whenever we're looking at high rates of inflation. We'll also talk about what's going on with Turkey's balance of trade. It's an actual net importer, and that's one of the problems that it has. It's paying more for its imports than it's receiving payments for its exports. And then we'll talk about whether or not there are any green shoots of recovery, because Turkey has actually struck some deals over the last month or so, which will bring in large chunks of cash. We'll also talk about a really interesting smuggler who was recently arrested, trying to take something out of Turkey. And I'll give you a clue as to what it was. This guy was trying to deal in the most expensive liquid in the world. This liquid is valued at $10 million per litre. Can you guess what it is? Well, I'll tell you later in this video, and I will be amazed if you'll know what it is. And then finally today, I'll wrap up with my summary. So what I think is happening in Turkey right now, and whether or not there is any chance that Turkey is going to be able to get itself out of this situation and start moving on the path to recovery. But before we get started on all of that, I'd like to say once again, thank you so much to everyone that's supporting the channel. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks recently, thank you. Really appreciate that. And if you've signed up as a long-term supporter, either through Patreon, where you can get early access to my videos and watch them without any adverts, or YouTube membership, where you'll also get early access, or buy me a coffee membership, thank you for that support. It really helps to keep me motivated, keeps me thinking up more videos to post on a regular basis, so thanks. If you've been following the channel, you'll be aware that historically Turkey was following what's called a contrarian approach to its economic policies. So basically, it was doing the opposite to what general economic theory says you should do at times of high inflation. And that theory says that when you have high inflation, the correct thing to do is increase interest rates, because it makes the cost of borrowing more expensive, so it discourages both companies and individuals from taking on more debt. It also makes interest rates in the bank more attractive, so people are more likely to leave their money in the bank rather than spending it. And the overall impact of increasing interest rates should be that it reduces demand, and when you have a reduction in demand, generally speaking, that should bring down prices. But Turkey decided it didn't want to do that, and instead of increasing interest rates, it was lowering interest rates at a time of high inflation. And as I said at the beginning of today's video, in October 2022, inflation in Turkey hit 85%. Now, following the recent re-election of President Erdogan, he decided to change that economic policy. And in June 2023, Turkey started to increase its interest rates again. This chart shows the movement in the official rate of interest in Turkey over the last 3 years. And you can see that back in May 21, interest rates were running at 19%. And at that stage, inflation was sitting at 16% in Turkey, so quite high. Despite the fact that inflation was running at a high level, Turkey reduced its interest rate on 4 separate occasions at the end of 2021, and by the start of 2022, interest rates were down to 14%. And over that same period, inflation increased from 16% to 49%. Despite this rapid increase in inflation, Turkey persisted with its policy of reducing interest rates, and by the end of 2022, the official rate of interest was down to 9%, And inflation was up to 64%. And as I mentioned at the start of today's video, in October 22, it actually peaked at 85%. But as you can see, in the second half of 2023, Turkey decided to reverse its policy of reducing interest rates. And over the past 12 months, there have been 9 separate increases in interest rates, rising from 8.5% to the current level of 50%. And just to put that rate into context, this table shows the current interest rates of all the other countries of the G20. And the G20 are notionally the 20 largest economies in the world. And you can see that Turkey has by far the highest rate at 50%. The next closest rate is Argentina at 40%. And if you follow the channel, you'll be aware that inflation in Argentina is currently running at 289%. And the only other countries in the G20 that currently have interest rates in double figures are Russia, where it's 16%, Mexico, where it's 11%, and Brazil, where it's 10.5%. And this table compares all of the countries in the world, and you can see that the only country that has a higher rate of interest than Turkey is Venezuela, where it's currently just under 59%. And interestingly, the latest published inflation rate for Venezuela is 67.8%, which is actually lower than the current rate of inflation in Turkey. And that really highlights how serious the problem is in Turkey when you are worse than Venezuela. And when you look at the names of the other countries on this list, Venezuela, Argentina, Ghana, Egypt, Nigeria, Malawi, Congo, Sierra Leone, Iran, Pakistan, Liberia, Zimbabwe, all of these countries are in a state of economic crisis. And Turkey is ranked almost at the top of this list. So it really does show what a severe situation there is right now in Turkey. This chart shows the movement in the official inflation rate in Turkey over the last 12 months. And what this shows is that this time last year, inflation in Turkey was running at 39.5%. However, over the last 12 months, there has been a rapid and consistent increase in inflation. Inflation hit 58.9% in August, rose to 61.5% in September, and has remained above 60% in every single month since then. And the latest figures for April 2023 show that the current 12-month rate of inflation is 69.8%, so almost 70%. And if we expand the scale of this chart to show what's been happening over the last 5 years, you can see that at the end of 2021, inflation started to take off and hit that peak of 85% that we talked about earlier in the video in October 22. In the first half of 2023, inflation did start coming back down and got to a low of 38% in June 23. However, over the last 10 months, inflation has started to take off again, and this is a very worrying sign from Turkey's perspective. And if we compare the current rate of inflation with the rest of the G20, only Argentina at 289%, which is obviously completely off the scale, has a higher rate of inflation. And in fact, only Argentina and Turkey are in double figures. And if we compare against every country in the world, there are only 2 countries, Argentina, which has collapsed economically, and Syria, which is a war-torn economy, have higher rates of inflation than Turkey. And Turkey's current rate of inflation is higher than it is in Venezuela, Sudan, Lebanon, Zimbabwe, Congo, Sierra Leone, Iran, Nigeria, Palestine, Egypt, Malawi. The list goes on of countries that are in economic crisis. And once again, this really highlights the severity of the problem in Turkey today. This chart shows the movement in the rate of food inflation, so the price of food in Turkey over the last 12 months. And what this shows is that in May 23, food prices were increasing by 52.5%. They then started increasing rapidly, and by August 23, food prices were rising by 73%. The rate of food price increases hit a 12-month high of 75% in September 23, and since that time, food prices have stabilised a bit. However, the most recent increase in food prices is 68.5%. And it's interesting because when you look at this graph, you could be lulled into the false sense of security of thinking, well, actually, things aren't getting too bad. They're much better than they were in September 23. 68.5% is better than 75%. But if you take a step back and think about these figures, we are talking about the price of food increasing by 68% over the last 12 months. And I don't think that many people's salary will have increased by anything like 68.5%. Most people in Turkey will be lucky if they've got a 15 or 20% increase in their wages. So what that means is that in relative terms, people have less money to buy food. And we've talked about this before, but the poorest members of society have the least disposable income. They're spending a high percentage of their monthly salary on food. It can be 70, 80, 90 or even 100% of all of their money is going on food to put on the table for their family. And when prices are increasing by 68.5%, that's adding further pressure onto people's budgets. And it means that some families in Turkey are currently struggling to be able to put enough food on the table, and people are going hungry. And this is why it's such a serious situation right now. And this table compares the rate of food inflation to the other countries of the G20. And you can see that Turkey is ranked as the second worst performer in the G20. Argentina is out on its own. It's got food inflation of 293%, which is just incredible. That is putting a lot of pressure onto a lot of families in Argentina right now. But in the G20, there isn't another country where food inflation is in double figures. And if we look at the rest of the world, there are only 2 other countries in addition to Argentina that have higher rates of food price increases right now. South Sudan, where food prices have increased by 186%, and Zimbabwe, where prices are up by 105%. And Turkey has the 4th highest food inflation in the whole of the world. This chart shows the movement in Turkey's balance of trade over the last 12 months. And the balance of trade basically measures the difference between the value of all of your exports, so what you're being paid for things that you're selling, and the cost of all of your imports, so what you're paying out for everything that you need to buy. And the scale on the right-hand side of this chart goes from 0 at the top to minus 12.5 billion US dollars at the bottom. And the first and most obvious thing to note about this chart is that in every single one of the last 12 months, Turkey has recorded a negative balance of trade. So basically, it's paying more for all of its imports than it's receiving for its exports. And the reason for that is that Turkey is a net importer, and the things that it's importing that are expensive are fuel, so it imports oil and gas and coal, and it also imports food. And these are basic essentials that a country needs to be able to survive. And if we look at the actual figures involved here, in May 2023, the balance of trade was negative 12.5 billion. It's remained in negative territory ever since, and in April 2024, the balance of trade was negative $9.9 billion. And if we expand the scale of this chart out to show the last 5 years, you can see that in every single month in the last 5 years, Turkey has recorded a negative balance of trade. And this is basically like you overspending every single month for the last 5 years. At some point, either it has to stop, or you need a large influx of cash. And that's exactly what Turkey needs. It needs help, it needs aid, it needs large amounts of investment in order to try to get the country back up and running again, to start earning more from its exports so that it can move into a positive balance of trade. But obviously, that is a big challenge right now. As we've just discussed, one of the reasons why Turkey does run a negative balance of trade is that it has to import large quantities of fuel, which obviously are very expensive. And interestingly, despite the fact that Turkey has made a lot of moves towards renewable energy, it's been investing heavily in hydroelectric plants, it's now become the largest user of coal to produce electricity in the whole of Europe. This chart shows the breakdown of the source of energy used for electricity production in Turkey in 2023. And the scale on the left-hand side of this chart shows the gigawatt hours of electricity produced and goes from 0 at the bottom to 100,000 hours at the top. And across the bottom, we've got all of the different power sources. And what this shows us that the largest single source was coal, which Turkey has to import, and it produced over 75,000 gigawatt hours. The second largest source was natural gas, which Turkey also has to import, producing over 68,000 gigawatt hours. The third largest was hydropower, producing just under 64,000 gigawatt hours. And interestingly, Turkey has struggled this year in terms of the water levels because of climate change and the change in terms of precipitation. A number of the plants haven't had enough water, and therefore that's reduced the amount of energy that they were able to produce. The fourth largest source, producing almost 41,000 gigawatt hours, is another form of coal called lignite. And when you add this column to the first column for coal, that means that overall coal products produced over 115,000 gigawatt hours in Turkey in 2023. The fifth largest source was wind, producing around 34,000 gigawatt hours, followed by solar, which produced around 19,000 hours, geothermal around 11,000, and biomass just under 10,000. This chart compares the amount of coal used by Europe's three largest users, Germany, Poland and Turkey, to produce electricity. Dating back to 2018, the blue bars on this chart show Germany's usage, the red bars Poland's usage, and Turkey's usage is shown by the white bars. And what this shows is that in the period between 2018 and 2023, Germany was by far the largest user of coal in every single year. However, in the first 4 months of 2024, Turkey has now overtaken Germany, using coal to produce 39.5 terawatt hours of electricity compared to 34.6 for Germany. And as you can see from this chart, the main reason why Turkey is now the largest user in Europe is because Germany has significantly reduced its usage. It's moving away from using coal-fired power stations to using other more renewable energy sources. Turkey, over the same period, has slightly increased its usage. So whilst it wants to move to more renewable, it's struggling because a lot of those renewable energy sources are not reliable enough at the moment. And this chart compares the CO2 emissions for Germany, Poland and Turkey over the same period. And the scale on the left-hand side here shows millions of tonnes of CO2. And once again, you can see that in the first 4 months of 2024, Turkey has now overtaken Germany in terms of producing more CO2. And finally, this chart shows the percentage of energy produced using coal in the three countries. Now, interestingly, in terms of percentages, Poland is producing the highest percentage of its electricity from coal, 59.2%, compared with 33.9% for Turkey and 20.9% for Germany. However, because Poland is a smaller country than Turkey, in real terms, Turkey is still using more coal and producing more CO2 emissions. So the situation in Turkey remains critical, and I'm sometimes accused of being quite negative in these videos, just portraying a very bleak picture. So I wanted to talk about some promising deals that Turkey have entered into recently that potentially could provide an influx of capital and start to get the industry in Turkey improving again, expanding in terms of its production and its output, and hopefully moving Turkey slowly towards getting to at least a neutral balance of trade, if not a positive balance of trade. It's recently been announced that the Islamic Development Bank Group will provide $6.3 billion of financing for projects in Turkey over the next 2 years. $2 billion of that financing will come directly from the Islamic Development Bank, $900 million from the International Islamic Trade Finance Corporation, $300 million from the Islamic Corporation for the Development of the Private Sector, and $3.1 billion from the Islamic Corporation for the Insurance of Investment and Export Credit. It will support sectors such as education, health, transport, finance, agriculture, industry, energy and infrastructure. And this $6.3 billion is in addition to the $12.9 billion of funding that the Islamic Development Bank have already provided to Turkey. The World Bank has recently announced that it signed a deal with Turkey for a $1 billion program to support renewable energy expansion efforts in the country. The program will help establish and expand Turkey's market for distributed solar energy and pilot a program for battery storage. And the country's Development and Investment Bank of Turkey and Industrial Development Bank of Turkey will be implementing the program. Turkey is currently in advanced discussions with Chinese electric car makers BYD and Chery Automobile for factory investments in the country, Turkey's industry minister recently announced. He went on to say that there is significant interest of global brands for the production of electric cars in Turkey. Okay, so it's competition time. Did you guess what the world's most valuable liquid is? The $10 million per litre liquid. Well, if you did, congratulations, because it's quite difficult. It is spider and scorpion venom, which is milked from those creatures in order to be used in the pharmaceuticals industry. And you may think that that sounds like some far-fetched tale, but there are actually whole laboratories in Turkey that are doing exactly this. And it was recently reported that the Turkish police arrested a man suspected of trying to smuggle valuable poisonous spiders and scorpions out of the country. Police arrested the suspect at Istanbul airport and seized dozens of bags from his luggage containing around 1,500 scorpions and spiders, including tarantulas, as well as dozens of plastic bottles containing unspecified liquids. Turkish state-owned news agency Anadolu reported the suspect was Lorenzo Prendini, a curator at the historic US Museum. Police said the specimens seized were endemic to Turkey and that their DNA could be copied and their poisons milked for use in making medicines. Turkish police said it is understood that these medicines have very high financial values and therefore taking these animal species abroad is strictly forbidden. It said research showed that the market value of 1 litre of medicine obtained from scorpion venom was worth $10 million. A scorpion produces around 2 milligrams of venom daily, which can be harvested or milked using a pair of tweezers and tongs before it's then dried and made into a powder which can be used in various formulations. And it's been reported that some cosmetics companies are now adding scorpion venom or its extracts to their products, claiming miracle-like results from their concoctions. So far, the claims made by cosmetic companies are unproven, but the potential medical uses of extracts from the venom are considered scientifically very interesting. Research that is currently ongoing includes the use of venom for pain relief purposes, the treatment of epilepsy and irritable bowel syndrome, and there is also a component that could be effective against strokes. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video to provide you with the latest update as to what's happening in Turkey, because we've been following Turkey for the last 3 years or so. And as you've seen from today's data, the situation is now getting worse. Inflation has risen significantly over the last 6 months or so and is now sitting at just under 70%, making Turkey one of the worst countries in the world in terms of inflation and also in terms of interest rates. And the problem that you have with high levels of inflation is really multiple, because firstly, it reduces the value of all of your money. If you're being paid a salary in Turkish Lira, then every single month when you go to the store, prices have increased again. And unless your salary constantly is moving at the same rate as inflation, that means that you've got less and less cash every single month. So that's demoralizing for the population. It also means that certain parts of the population, the poorer people, are struggling to be able to afford food. So you're getting higher levels of poverty, and that causes issues in a country. And also it means that people are losing further faith with the Lira. We didn't look at the charts for Lira in today's video, but over the last 12 months, the Lira has lost around 60% of its value. So that means that if you had your life savings in Lira this time last year, today those life savings would be worth around 60% less in the international markets than they were last year. And obviously that's terrible from everybody's perspective. And what that's doing is forcing people to use the US dollar. Rather than holding all of your investments and savings in Lira, you would much rather be holding US dollars, because over the last 12 months, the US dollar has actually appreciated in value. So your purchasing power would have gone up, and you know the value of the greenback will remain relatively constant. And that's a problem for Turkey, because as more people move towards using the dollar, that means that they have less control over the economy itself, because when you're increasing interest rates, if people aren't actually using the Lira, it doesn't have the same impact as if everybody was using your currency. And that means that your economy starts to get out of control, and it's difficult to be able to match up what you're doing with interest rates to inflation. And that's exactly what's happening in Turkey right now, because over the last 12 months, we've seen interest rates rise rapidly from 8.5% to 50%, one of the highest levels in the whole of the world. But at the same time, inflation has also taken off. And that doesn't make sense when you look at the traditional economic theory. As we talked about right at the start of today's video, when you increase interest rates, it should reduce people's spending power and therefore reduce demand and therefore reduce prices. But that isn't happening in Turkey today. And one of the reasons for that is because people are using the dollar, and so movements in the interest rate for the Turkish lira isn't having the same level of impact as it would in the USA, for example. So what is Turkey going to do about this situation? How is it going to dig itself out of this hole? Well, as we saw, the balance of trade is running at a highly negative situation. Turkey is spending significantly more every single month than it's receiving for the value of its exports. And that means that every single month there is pressure on the government and the central bank to be able to find more currency to keep paying for things like oil imports, gas imports, coal imports, and food imports, all of which it needs to keep the economy moving forward. So Turkey is now looking to strike deals, and we talked about some of them in today's video. I wanted to give you some positive news, some news that Turkey is actually getting some assistance. And the Islamic Development Bank is providing over $6 billion. Obviously, that will help. In addition, the World Bank is putting another billion in, and Chinese companies are talking to Turkey about setting up factories. So all of this will help. But it's not enough. It's not going to solve the situation for Turkey. It needs to start on some sort of investment program to try to improve the output of all of its industry, to build up Turkey again to being a manufacturing base, somewhere that international companies want to go to invest into, to try to build employment and increase the GDP. That's the long-term goal for Turkey. But clearly, as it sits right now, it's going to take time to achieve that, and it's going to be very difficult. And in the meantime, Turkey remains under severe pressure. The continued high levels of inflation are putting a lot of pressure onto families in Turkey, and the currency continues to fall in value. So the overall summary of today's video is that the situation in Turkey remains critical. Inflation is now up to 70%. Interest rates are up to 50%. There is a lot of pressure on the Turkish lira, and Turkey is going to be struggling for at least the rest of 2024. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.